In the summer of 1967, I just turned my 21st birthday in Vietnam, and I was known as Sergeant DuPree at that time, and I flew medevac missions. I was the medic in the back of the chopper, the aircraft that we utilized to medevac casualties. I entered the Air Force in the winter of 1965, and went to a lot of the recruiters, all of the recruiters as a matter of fact. I was interested in getting into the computer field, and took all the entrance courses, the aptitude, what I was best at, and the Air Force said my grades were high enough I could really do anything I wanted to, and I said, well, I want to get in the computer field. So the recruiter said, no problem. Found out later you never listen to a recruiter. But anyway, after completing basic training at Lackland Air Force Base, I sat in front of the next assignment sergeant. I guess he had a title, but anyway, the sergeant that told me what I was going to be doing next, and waiting to hear what kind of computer field or school I was going to go to. And he said, you got a choice. He said, you can be an air policeman, you can be a cook, or you can be a medic. And I said, it's got to be some kind of mistake. I was going into the computer field, and that's what I want, and that's what I'm going to be doing. And if you believe I said that, I got a bridge to sell you. So anyway, I said, I did say, are you sure there wasn't a mistake, in a real quiet voice? I'd just gone through the basic training, so I was in awe and of all of the sergeants at higher grade than I did anyway. I wouldn't even talk to officers at that point. And he said, no mistake, you've got a choice. And I don't have a lot of time, so tell me what you want to do next. Cook, air policeman, or medic. So I thought about it, and I said, well, okay, if that's all I've got to choose from, let me be a medic. So went off to medical school and spent several months, almost a year and a half of training, really, a little over a year of training. And I did find out the scores did help me, though. It did allow me to go into a medevac and be on flying status, which was a big thing for enlisted people in any branch of service. And after medical training, I was assigned to the 464th Combat Support Group at Pope Air Force Base. And the purpose of that, the mission for that group, was to go anywhere in the world on what we heard was a 24-hour notice. I didn't see how we were ever going to pack our stuff up in 24 hours, but that was our mission. And at the time I was there, which wasn't that long before we went to Vietnam, we flew to some missions in and out of the Dominican Republic, and that's about the basis of what we did while I was there at Pope Air Force Base. We were an elite medevac unit. We could even blouse our boots on base, and that's unheard of in the Air Force too. And when we weren't on flight standby or on an actual flight, then we honed our skills at Womack Army Hospital on Fort Bragg. Pope Air Force Base and Fort Bragg adjoin each other. And we honed our skills in the emergency room, and I got so good, some of the surgeons in there and some of the doctors on duty there, with the skills that we had learned in our training, they even allowed me to suture dependents. And all of you people that are medics or doctors, you know that's a pretty good deal if you can do that with dependents in any branch of service. February of '67, we were called to a squadron meeting, and we were told the Marines and Army were running short of medics in Vietnam, and we were going to go fill the gap. We didn't exactly know what fill in the gap meant, but we were sure going to find out in the following 12 months. The 903rd left Pope Air Force Base with full medical gear, GP large tents, supplies, personnel, and we left Pope Air Force Base on 3 C-130 aircraft, and those are the large 4-engine turboprop aircraft. Tyler's laughing in the back. And it took us 5 days to go from Pope Air Force Base to land it and stopped along the way for fuel and repairs. Hawaii, some of the same islands that you were talking about, we hit too. And finally landed 5 days later at a Central Highlands coastal city called Quy Nhon. And really my first impressions of Vietnam were very pleasant. You know, we had mountains in the background, lush green, vibrant foliage, and It had a gentle rain. It was nice and cool there the day that we landed. And the 3 airplanes came in. We unloaded our gear on deuce-and-a-half trucks, and we were off to our main duty station at Phuket, which was about several hours away. We went on a convoy of deuce-and-a-half trucks. The trip to Phuket was uneventful for the first hour. It was still raining. And then the second hour, no combat or anything, the second hour the rain stopped. And within about 20 minutes, the heat was horrendous. The humidity was horrendous. We felt like parboiled lobsters in the back of those deuce-and-a-halves that we were trying to just keep from being so hot on the way to our duty station. Phuket was a new tactical air command base, and the F-100s were going to be stationed there and fly out of there. So we got there at the time they were building the base up. And we'll give our commander credit. We found out what filling the gap meant pretty quickly. He called us to a meeting after we unloaded our gear, got everything squared away, and gave us our duty assignments. And our duty in Vietnam was to go anywhere there was a major battle. And the reason for that was we were medics. We were trained in wound management. We were highly trained in all aspects of medevac. And we were there to fill the gap when the Army or the Marines, whichever branch of service that we needed to help out. Approximately 30 of our unit, we were called a flight over there rather than a squadron, 903rd Aeromedical Evacuation Flight. And there were 100 of us, 30 to 35 of us were the flight medics, and then the rest of the personnel were support group, radio operators, officers, and command and administrative. And some of the areas that we went to were in I Corps. We spent a lot of time at a place called Dong Ha and Khe Sanh with the Marines. And then further south, 2 and 3 Corps area, we even spent a little time at Cam Ranh Bay, which was about as far south as you could get. And then at Pleiku, some places like that in the Central Highland areas. But the most time that we spent, because it seems to be where the most action was in I Corps with the Marines at Khe Sanh and Dong Ha. We were with the Army 173rd Airborne Division at Dak To in 1967 for the Thanksgiving offensive. And I tell my wife this, and it's the best meal I've ever had in my life at Thanksgiving in '67. We've been eating sea rations for the entire time that we were there. And the Army actually brought in Hueys filled with turkey and dressing and mashed potatoes and great vegetables. And even with the red Vietnamese dust, it was just wonderful after comparing it with the sea rats we'd been eating. And honey, you make fantastic Thanksgiving dinners, but that was the best. Our primary mission was the evacuation of wounded Marines and soldiers from the battle areas. And our squadron, our flight didn't have any aircraft assigned to us. We called in the aircraft that we needed depending on the number of casualties, or if we were out in the field on the Hueys, we would still come back to those areas and give them the primary or immediate treatment that they needed, and then take them to the major hospitals at Da Nang or Pleiku, whatever the large military hospital we were close to. And most of the flights were less than an hour in length. We spent all of our time just making sure that we did everything possible to keep those soldiers and the Marines alive and giving them the medical care that we knew best how to give. And that was our whole mission, to make sure that we did everything that we could to get those Marines and soldiers to the hospitals. And our medevac flights would usually be from 1 casualty to up to 70 on a fully loaded C-130. And the C-130s, the only time that we really had full loads were at Khe Sanh. And when the Marines were taking Hill 881, 861, we flew the majority of those fully loaded. And sometimes there'd be so many casualties, we would triage them actually outside the medevac tents that we would set up. And triage is it's something that you don't really want to do as a medic, because really what you're doing, the doctors and the staff there are really deciding which ones can make it and which ones cannot make it. And then triage is deciding that and getting the ones that can make it on those flights out to the hospitals. And hopefully you can take care of all of them, but reality is reality in war. When we did our medevac missions, if we were on fully loaded C-130s, it was 4 to 5 medics. And if we had a flight nurse on site, we would take a flight nurse with us. But generally speaking, all of our flights were single medics, and we had total responsibility for the care of those casualties. I was awarded was on flying status, but the wings that we had as crew members said that if we were ever off flying status, we had to remove our wings if we were at another unit that wasn't on flying status. After 12 missions in a combat area, we had what we call permanent wings, and I had orders for those within the first month of being there. Went on in Vietnam for the year that I was there. Was awarded the Air Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, which equaled 368 missions while I was in Vietnam. We treated anything from minor wounds to the walking wounded ambulatory patients to the very critically wounded Marines and soldiers. And we gave them the best, like I said before, the best care that we knew how. And some of them had injuries serious enough you knew that they weren't going to make it, but you still didn't stop. You did everything you could to do everything to keep them alive. And all I can say is the bravery and the wanting to live that I saw in soldiers and Marines there was just awe-inspiring and remarkable to me. All of them, if they could speak at all, they would say things, how soon can I get back to my unit? And that was the prevailing heroism that I saw exhibited with those wounded Marines and soldiers. And from time to time, we would even medevac prisoners of war. Now, I remember one case in particular. Can't remember the base. It might have been at Dong Ha also. But they brought in a Viet Cong prisoner, and he'd been in the field about a week before our soldiers found him. And he had a wound in his shoulder from a piece of shrapnel. And it had festered quite a bit during that week's time, and you can imagine in that jungle heat and humidity. And the wound was full of maggots. And the way we treated that, and it was a large wound too, and the way we treated that was to pour hydrogen peroxide into that wound, and then the maggots would just flow out. Now see, you don't really want me to tell medevac stories. I can tell that already. So I'm going to lighten it up a bit, and I'm going to tell other stories closer to the ground. But one story that I tell is that Dong Ha was a major Marine base, and a major base for munitions and ammunition, and it was just a major hub of Marine activity. And it had a pretty good sized runway, so we could bring in C-130s to that base. And one day I was liaison for 130 that we'd called in to configure for medevac. And when I pulled the Jeep up that I was in to watch the C-130 come in and taxi, and when it got to a place where I knew it was going to stop, then I left that parking place and went down to the C-130. And as pretty much routine, when a plane that large comes into a base that close to the enemy, they always want to try to bracket you with rockets or what they used in the hills around Dong Ha, I believe were 152 millimeter Russian artillery. And the rockets were so haphazard, you didn't know where they were going to hit. So really I got to where I wasn't even afraid of those anymore. You didn't want them to get close to you. But the artillery was different. You could actually hear that walk toward you, and you were always anxious for it to start walking away from you. This particular day, they were using rockets, so they were going all over the place. And the aircraft commander was getting anxious, and we were quickly loading the casualties that we had. We had about 30 to load, and they managed to take off without incident. The aircraft was safe and no damage to the aircraft at all. As I was going back to my unit, traveled the same route in reverse, and I saw where a rocket had landed close to the runway. It was pretty close to where I'd come down, and I stopped there, and the rocket had landed about where the transmission was in the Jeep that I was parked there. And that was a period of time of about 15 minutes. So I knew at that time somebody was looking out for me. And there were a few other instances that I felt I was being watched over very closely too. Another event that I like to tell was some of the large bases, we always had Vietnamese on the base. They were doing different tasks and being paid for it for their duties. And you got to know some of them. And at Dong Ha, a lot of stories about Dong Ha. I think I spent a lot of time there. But one of the Vietnamese wanted me to sample some food. They were always kidding me about eating some of their lunch, and I'd always say no. Well, one day I said, okay, I'll try some. And I don't think it was more than a teaspoonful. And said, well, you need to, I tried it, got sick, and I spent all day out both ends, if you can imagine that. And that night I was so sleepy and tired that I just couldn't go into the tent and sleep. I slept on top of the sandbags and on the outside of the tent. That night they hit the base with artillery and rocket fire, and I woke up to the sound of the bombardment, dove into the bunker, and I almost got shot going into it because, like I said, it had been going on 20 or 30 minutes, and they thought I died up there somewhere. But anyway, the next morning, to make a long story short, we climbed out of our bunker because we stayed in there pretty much the whole night. It was a whole night event. And the side of the sandbags where I was on top of, there was shrapnel hits all along the bottom of the base, all the way up to about 3 inches from the top where I was. And then it went above me, and wiped out the tent that we were sleeping in, or supposed to be sleeping in, and even cut down 2 of the tent poles. And got some more stories, but I'm running out of time. They're giving me one of these back here. So just want to close by saying that even though I have a wonderful family, a wonderful, loving, and faithful wife, and couldn't be more loyal, couldn't ask for a better family, and even a successful business career, there's still something about serving in Vietnam, because I knew what I did over there and what our unit did mattered. And it's still a special place in my heart, even though some of the things I don't ever want to go through again. It's still a special place because it did matter so much. And that's all I've got to say.
Well, first let me say it's a great honor for me to be here. I listen to these stories and I can't help but think that goes through my mind that I'm not deserving to be sitting up here. But in reality, that's not surprising, because most women veterans and most women who serve in the military truly do believe at times that their service wasn't as significant as men, and research has showed that. But our service is as significant regardless of the roles that we have provided throughout the history of our country. Absolutely. So in 1983, I was a senior in high school. I was raised in the not so good neighborhoods outside of Washington, D.C. and Northeast. My father was a cab driver. And I knew it was never discussed in my home that anyone would ever go to college. It just wasn't a discussion. But I knew in my heart I wanted to be a nurse. And I knew in order to be a nurse, I had to go to college. So I had babysat for a family who the father was a Vietnam vet. And he was using his GI Bill to go to school at that time. And I thought, wow, what an opportunity. I got my way out, I can go, and I can go to college. Because really in the back of my mind, I realized that if I didn't get out of the neighborhood that I was in Washington, D.C., I was either probably going to end up dead, pregnant, or addicted to drugs. So it was my escape, and I knew that the minute I walked into that recruiter's office, I couldn't look back, because there was no other opportunity from the time when I had decided to go into the Army. So I went in there with the high expectations that I was going to be a nurse in a nice little white uniform, wearing white shoes, and I got in there, and the recruiter popped in a cassette tape video, and he showed me a medic on the battlefield treating a sucking chest wound. And I was like, oh, no, 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 I'm not signing up for that. I want the white dress and the white shoes. And he said, well, I'm afraid that's not going to happen. He said, but you do meet the height requirement, and you can become an MP. And I thought for a minute, and I said, well, that sounds like fun. I had hung out with drug dealers, and so I thought, I can relate, right? So I went in, and I went into the MPs. My duty station, well, my basic training was at Fort McClellan, and I was in what was called one station unit training, so I did basic and AIT at the same place. But little did I know that I was one of the first MP companies where they were going to integrate women in with the men. So a company consists of 4 platoons. And in our company, there was 1 platoon of women and 3 platoon of men. And we were the only company in all of Fort McClellan that was structured that way. And initially, I didn't think that was a big deal, but as I went on, I realized that, we were always at the very back of the formations when we went on road marches, and we marched everywhere. There was no getting in buses, and maybe march for miles in the morning. You'd leave about 4 in the morning to go to your next training site. You get there at 7 in the morning, soaking wet. I learned real quick how to change my shirt under my BDUs without ever taking off my jacket, because it was soaked. So all of the females, the guys would go over there, they could take off their jackets, change their t-shirts, no big deal, but we didn't have any place to do that. So I learned real quick we had to keep up with the guys, and probably that was the best experience for me in basic training, because I realized that I had to be better. I had to be better to make it. And again, in the back of my mind, realizing what was I going to go home to if I couldn't make it. So I got to my first duty station. It was Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I was there about a month. And I was out on a scene doing something had been stolen out of a tank, because at the time that was the home of the tankers. And I did my MP report, and I did everything I was supposed to. And out comes a military police investigator. And we talked, and little did I know that he went back to the MP station and said, that at the time my name was Delaney. He said, that Private Delaney, she's got her act together. I think we need to bring her into MPI. Well, looking forward, I did get into MPI. I became a military police investigator. But that MPI agent that went out to the scene soon became my husband. So that's how my husband courted me. That's exactly right. So we knew each other about all of 2 months and got married. I was 18, he was 23, and I'm proud to say we are getting ready to celebrate our 34th wedding anniversary. Yeah. So he has been my best friend through all of my military career. He went to CID, and I decided, I had to follow him, and I went to CID as well. And even when I was a military police investigator, as a female agent, as a female investigator, you are always hit with all of the child abuse cases and the rape cases. And I learned that real quick in CID, that I had to have tough skin, because inevitably, whenever a baby died, whenever there was a battered child, whenever there was a woman who had been beaten and raped, I was the first one they called. In addition to, being probably 1% of CID, there's only about 14,000 agents, or 1,400 agents, and then in addition to be probably 1% of those agents are women. And so, that was a really tough kind of thing to deal with, and because we have a saying that when you look into the eyes of the monster, you become the monster. And although you don't experience it, some of it gets on you. And it wasn't so tough before I had kids. I could handle it, dealing with again, the children and the whole incidents of going on. But after I had kids, it became really difficult, because it meant something. it meant that that could have been my child, that could have been, you know, somebody that really I held very dear. And I can't deny that even to this day, when I go to sleep at night, those are the images that I have in my head. And all I can do is pray that, you know, they're in a better place, and whatever I did to get the perpetrator that either caused this heinous crime upon them convicted and put in jail, I did my part, and God put me there to do that for a reason. You know, I do an investigation. You have to be very, you know, unbiased and make sure that you collect the evidence. But at the same time, you know, you never, that never leaves you. I can remember, too, just kind of going back at the age of 18, going into the military police. I wasn't old enough to drink a beer, but I was old enough to carry a weapon. And in my first duty station, again at Fort Knox, there had been an E7 that had significantly beat his wife the night before, and my platoon sergeant had said, you know, Delaney, I need you to go out there and get this guy and bring him back in. And so, not thinking anything about it, I went out to go get him and to talk to him. And I sat down in his living room, and it was just he and we sat on the couch, and I said, you know, look, whatever happened last night, you know, we want to talk about it. I'd like for you to come back to the station with me. And he reached under the cushion of the couch and he held a gun to my head. I was 18 years old. I didn't know what to do. All I could do was to say, I really wish you'd put that gun down. And he did. And I thank God for that, because I didn't have the training to deal with that. But those are the kinds of things that you experience in military life that you think that it's normal. I need to get a drink of water. That you think it's normal and you deal with every day. So as time went on, I ended up getting stationed at Fort Hood, and they needed an agent to go over to Saudi Arabia to do some protective service details. So in essence, we were like the Secret Service for the Army. We provided protective services to the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Army, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I got over there. Now, keep in mind, when I joined the Army, again, like I said, going back, I didn't join it because it wasn't that I wasn't patriotic. I don't think I understood what that even meant. I just knew that this was my way out of this was going to make me a better person. So I went over to Saudi Arabia, and I was doing protective service details, and we were walking on the streets, and I couldn't help to realize that every time one of the Saudi women would pass me, they would hiss at me. And I was like, what is that? I mean, they would literally hiss at me. Well, I was in my burqa, and all you could see was my eyes, but they could see my blue eyes. So they knew I was American. So they would hiss at me as I walked down the street. One situation, we were walking down the street in Riyadh, and the minonets went off. And I recall being with my interpreter, and she literally pushed me into a carpet shop. Now over there, the doors on the front of the shops, they look like garage doors. And so they pushed me in there, the garage doors came back, and I'm like, what is going on? Well, they were about to behead somebody in what was referred to as Chop Chop Square, and we were very close to that area. And she was very fearful that if they saw me, they would pull me into so that I would have to witness that. So we spent about the next 2 hours up in the attic of a carpet shop drinking tea with the shop owner, hotter than all get out, and then waiting for that time to pass, and then we were able to come back out. Another situation was we were down in a store area, and again off duty, and I was in my burqa. I had a cover over my head, and it had fallen back, and up comes a white Jeep, and out jumps the Matawa, who are the religious police, and they begin beating on the Jeep hood, and she panicked and pulled my scarf back over my hair because, of course, they could see my blonde hair. And she said, they will beat you if you're not covering your hair. When I returned from Saudi Arabia, I can tell you I dropped to my knees and I kissed the ground because I knew then what it meant to be an American. And I knew then my service in the military, what I was protecting. It made sense to me. And I swore at that moment I would never stop serving the military or serving women veterans and making it a better place. Now, move forward several years later, I'm still in the reserves. 52 years old. I've had continuous service since the age of 18. I said when they'll kick me out, I'll move, I guess. I don't know. I'm coming up on my mandatory retirement date. But there's nothing more fulfilling. I serve now as the Women Veterans Program Manager, and it's an honor for me to do that at this point in my life and to make it better. We always say, you know, what do you say other than thank you for your service? And I say volunteer, help a veteran. We're coming up next year on the 37th Wheelchair Games in Cincinnati. You want something to volunteer for that. Where we have disabled veterans participating in the wheelchair games, and I'd be glad to share any information. And I know I have to stop, right? Or I'm running out of time. Okay, good. I have a little bit more time. So definitely, if you want something to do for veterans, the National Wheelchair Games is the place you need to be. There is nothing more fulfilling. We'll have 600 disabled veterans participating in Olympic-type events, and we need 3,000 volunteers to pull that off. So that's a way you can say, other than thank you for your service. Get involved with the American Legions, the VFWs, any veteran services that you can participate in, as well as the VA. I mean, we have volunteers, we have more than enough volunteer areas that you can come in and serve and be there for the veterans. But in closing, I guess I want to say that my military service has definitely been the most gratifying experience of my life. I would never change a minute of it, the good and the bad. And I just hope that if there are any young people, I see a lot of young people here, if you're led to do that, you will never regret it whatsoever in your life. So thank you.
Well, first, I'd like to thank all of the opening acts for the main event here. My name is Cory Paul. I am 6 years spent in the Ohio Army National Guard. I'm also the Regional Director of Services to Armed Forces for the American Red Cross. And this is such a humbling experience, first and foremost for me, to be able to be a guest and to be in the audience, listening to the kind of stories that we're hearing today. And the importance of first being receptive to the kind of stories that we're hearing today is paramount. Second, and that leads into the fact that you're making a bunch of people very comfortable to tell their story and to revisit something that maybe they're not very comfortable to revisit. Or maybe they are, and they tell those stories every day. But for me, I have a position where I work with veterans and work with service members on the daily basis. And being a service member, it really does bring back that floodgate sometimes. I was giving a speech at the Red Cross board meeting, and by the end of it, I was in tears. I had never been in a situation like that, and that was a couple weeks ago. And so now I'm sitting here and going, okay, keep it together. All right. So I joined the military in 2010 after I graduated from college. I graduated from OU with a bachelor's in criminology, and I wanted to do something with cops or the penal system or investigations, something like that. That was 2008, and if anybody remembers 2008, we weren't doing so well as a country as far as the economy was going. It was very hard to find a job. I was a lifeguard making $12 an hour with a degree. And I was having a really difficult time getting along. And I got recruited. While I was looking for jobs, every once in a while that link would pop up for the National Guard. Oh, okay, see the world and do all that kind of stuff, right? It took me a long time to get into that mindset. I never thought that I would be in the military, or never thought that I would serve like that. So I joined in 2010 with the Ohio Army National Guard, and I didn't really choose my military occupational specialty, which is a combat engineer. I chose the armory that was closest to my house. That was how I made that decision. And I really didn't even know what a combat engineer was. And if you're looking at what combat engineers do, especially in today's theater, it is looking for IEDs, looking for and finding IEDs, route clearance patrols, things like that. And honestly, I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I knew that I had to pay for school. My loans were coming up. I was in debt. I was trying to figure out what I really wanted to do with my life, and joined. Went to basic. I was probably one of the older people in basic training at a ripe old age of 25, and I realized that I had an opportunity to work with younger guys that needed a little bit of leadership. And so immediately I took on a leadership role, and I realized that this is kind of working for me. I never really had an opportunity to have those kind of experiences, and I felt very comfortable. I really enjoyed basic training, as masochistic as that might sound. I enjoyed working through that problem and working through getting everybody across that finish line. And National Guard, after basic, we just did the 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. Went to the drill and didn't really do too much as far as service. I didn't feel like I was doing that much. And then we got the warning order for a deployment to Afghanistan. And that was something I wasn't expecting. I joined the National Guard because they might not deploy. There's a good chance that they don't or whatnot. But now, about 60% of the deployments are from National Guardsmen and women. That's probably even more. I don't know the exact statistic, but so anyway, we got deployed to Afghanistan in 2013 in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. And I deployed to a place called Kalat, Afghanistan. It's about 70 clicks east of Kandahar. We had 2 route clearance patrols with all kinds of up-armored vehicles. So these are Humvees and big, just monstrosities of vehicles. 6 wheels, huge, as tall as I am, even taller. I mean, they wouldn't even be able to fit in this building. They were so big. And they were heavy. They were built with very thick steel and bulletproof glass and made and designed to run over IEDs and be safe, right? Or be semi-safe. That was a far departure from some of our colleagues that were riding around in tin cans, riding over the same IEDs 10 years before I got there, 5 years before I got there. I considered myself lucky as a combat engineer at that time, because I was using all kinds of really amazing implements, amazing technology. I kind of felt guilty a little bit about that, because my colleagues that didn't have that the year before saw a lot more casualties than we did. And so we would basically go up and down the road, about 70 kilometers piece of highway, of Highway 1, or what they call Ring Road in Afghanistan, kind of went all the way around the country. Back and forth, I think all told, we did about 13,000 kilometers. That's New York to LA 3 or 4 times, all at 10 kilometers an hour. This is slow, it's slow going. And basically, we used all this technology and all these implements to look for IEDs, but the best thing that we could count on were our eyes and our interpreters and the locals who got to know us and got to recognize the insignia on our vehicles as we were going up and down. They say, hey, they would come over and our interpreter would tell us, and they say, we saw somebody digging over there yesterday or last night. And so we would go in and interrogate, and sure enough, there were 30 containers of homemade explosive under a bridge, waiting to kill us or waiting to kill somebody else. And you get smart real quick. You get really cautious real quick. One of the things I tell a lot of people is we were on this very small base. Probably about 800 people on base. And during that time, there were a lot of threats of insider attacks. So you had the Afghan National Army, the Afghan National Police. We were working very close together with them. And every once in a while, their family would get kidnapped, and then they would shoot a soldier because that's what they were told to do to release their family. I was way more afraid in the chow hall eating my Cheerios than I was in these big vehicles with an IED straight, staring us in the face. Because at least that was armored. At least we had a better block between the two, right? And so that the amount of awareness, that hypervigilance a lot of people talk about, that right? You really get to know that really well. You really get to know that's your safety blanket almost. Before I deployed, I didn't know I was going to come home. And so I had about 6 months to really think about it, to see the news every day of soldiers being killed, to see the news every day of all the kind of things that were happening around the world. And honestly, I had no idea if I was coming home or not. And so I got rid of my apartment, and I sold my car, and I sold my guitar, and I literally got rid of most of my earthly possessions because I didn't want my parents or my family to have to deal with all my stuff if I wasn't coming home. That's the kind of mindset I had. But once I was over there, it was normalized. It was easy. I didn't think about that much. I thought about the mission. I thought about my fellow soldiers and the kind of stuff that we needed to do to make sure that everyone came home okay. I was one of 2 intelligence support officers, so I didn't go outside the wire as much as my comrades, but I did have to watch a lot of live drone feeds, a lot of intelligence that was coming through on secret networks of insurgents or attacks on base where the insurgents were, or the people that were collaborating in the attack, were tied together with bicycle chains, are locked together with bicycle chains because they were forced to do this. They were literally forced, like, go. We're going to shoot you or go. Here's a vest of explosives. Go do this terror. And we saw that every day. We were seeing the kind of awful things that people were doing to each other, that humans were doing to other humans because some sort of stupid belief or some sort of disagreement or politics. And so you talk about a moral injury. You talk about things that you need to see, that you had to see, that were people killing people or people putting people in such a horrible situation that you just didn't really even was able to process it. And I'm still kind of processing some of that. So you have the kind of mindset that I have before my deployment of, I don't know if I'm coming back, to my deployment where it was go, go, go every second of every day, to coming home. When I came home, the first thing my little sister asked me was if I killed anybody. said, okay, we're gonna talk. We're gonna talk for a couple minutes. That's not exactly how you welcome someone home. But she didn't know. She was nervous. She was very nervous. She didn't know how to react to me. I was a different person than I was. I had a hard time getting back to work. So I work for the Red Cross. I was working for the Red Cross before. They were gracious enough to find a temporary person for my job for the year that I was gone. And then when I returned home, we had cake and we had Sprite and it was great. And then get back to work, right? Start answering your emails. Start making your phone calls. Start being a normal civilian. I didn't know how to do that anymore. That was the hardest part. It was so difficult. One of my bosses, like I said, because I had a bunch of bosses, but one of my bosses had asked me to do something over email. Could you, make this call, or could you do that? I can't even remember what it was. Could you take care of this issue? And I typed back a one-word answer that said heard. So when I was in the combat operations tent, we would say stuff back and forth, and if you acknowledged it, or Wilco or Roger, heard was just another thing that we said. Yes, I heard you. I'm gonna move on. So I replied back to her heard. The next day, I was in the office of the CEO because I was insubordinate. No, I understand what you said. I took care of it. It's all good. But a thank you was in order. Or a good morning. Yes, I'm happy to do this. Right? It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for offering that job and task to me. And it was that kind of thing. And I had to explain. I had to say, listen, this is what we had to deal with. This is what I did every day. If I didn't answer that quickly, one of my soldiers might be dead. And they still didn't really get it. And so a lot of the challenge that we see on a daily basis with some of our veterans that are coming home is they have a hard time reintegrating into life. And so to mirror a lot of what Shirley said and a lot of what Dan said earlier is there are a lot of things that you can do. There are a lot of things that we can do as a group. The fact that we're all here, look around, there's a lot of people here. And it's 9:30 on a Friday night. That's awesome, right? So that couple hours that you spent here learning about and listening to and encouraging this discussion can be carried on to volunteer at the VA. Or with the Red Cross. Or, right?
Or TVCA.
Or the TVCA. There are a lot of really great things. But instead of thank you for your service, a welcome home, how are you? Is there anything that you'd like to talk about? What did you do over there? What did you do? What are some things that you'd like to talk about? Those are easy questions. My sister now, instead of did you kill anybody, is awesome with our veterans. When she goes and talks to people, she has those questions set up. Talk to us like we're people, okay? I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with so many other vets that are amazing. And thank you for TVCA and CityLink for hosting us. And that's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we're just going to open up for about 10 minutes of Q&A. If anybody has any questions that they would like to ask, and then we're going to do a quick little item. I don't want to spoil the surprise, and then we'll get out of here for this evening. So did anybody have any questions for our gentleman up here? I will tell you, if not, I promised Tyler that I would do a rap. And I did write it tonight. So they're saying no. I could do it as a poem.
Does anybody have any questions?
It's a very good rap. It starts, yo, yo. Henry, Carl, Gus, Will, thanks for the thrill. Now you're intrigued, right? Now you want it all. Go ahead, sir.
I have a question. Combat engineers, what was your unit?
The 837th out of Lorain, Ohio.
Okay.
Essayons.
I was sergeant major of a command engineer battalion at Fort Thomas, the 478, and they went to Afghanistan too.
Shirley, Cory, Larry, thanks for the scary.
He looked at me in the eye like, please help. First, I just want to say thank you to all that got up and spoke tonight. Mine's not really a question, it's more of an encouragement for our younger vets. If you're out here, do tell your stories, please. I'm a son of a Vietnam veteran serving the Army. He didn't talk much about what he did, but he surrounded himself by other Vietnam veterans, and I overheard their stories. Wasn't directed at me, but I was able to absorb that. Wasn't until recently that I found out he volunteered for 2 tours in Vietnam. But in hearing those stories growing up, when we went into Iraq in '91, I quit college to enlist because that was what was bred by the environment my father made. So please, first off, I felt like it was a debt owed to our World War II, our Korean, and our Vietnam vets. I owed it to you to pick up and serve because it was my time. Those coming back, you guys that were in Afghanistan and Iraq, sharing your story. I have my 13-year-old son here tonight. Hopefully his generation is going to absorb these, and when it's their time to call, because we shared our stories, they're going to pick it up and they're going to fight. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much for sharing that. It's very true. All right. But most of all, glad no boo. World War II, Vietnam, Korea, OIF, OEF. I promise, we all are here for you. That's my wrap. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the man, the creator, the awesomeness of the Sasquatch, Mr. Tyler Britton.
All right, I'm going to keep this short and sweet. First and foremost, thank you to all the speakers that came and shared their story and the moments of their life. That's living history that everyone got to experience tonight. So thank you all for that. It means a lot to me. Second off, thank you everyone who is sitting in a seat right now and here. That means a lot too. So we talked about bridging the military-civilian divide, and this is how you do it. You make people real. We all served, we had our place, we had our time, and now we're home. And so I want to thank a lot of people that helped this come to life. First off, my family. They traveled from Kansas, Colorado, and Missouri here. So thank you for coming. I want to thank the Trill Tribe for their support and encouragement over the past few years. They helped me reintegrate after 2 tours to Afghanistan. They really helped me reintegrate to home. So because of them, Cincinnati is now my home. So thank you guys. I want to thank CityLink Center, Dr. Joe Hannigman, Sarah Jacobs, Artswave, Institute for Military Medicine at UC, Humana, Madtree, Kroger, and especially DJ Kicks. Let's give it up for our MC. And lastly, I want to thank all the veterans that came before us. Those that could not be here tonight, I just want to say thank you to them.